organizer in Garfield Park. So thank you a lot for.
How you doing? West Side?
Have you ever taken a leap of faith? When you wake up in the middle of the night and realize you're on the wrong path, and then heart fluttering, stomach churning, you leap without really knowing where you're going to land. That happened to me. I was chief medical officer here at Rush when I resigned to spend all of my time on eliminating health inequities. And had I not taken that leap of faith, I would not have crossed paths with a man of faith, Pastor Marshall Hatch, New Mount Pilgrim Missionary Baptist Church in West Garfield Park. And had I not met that man of faith, we would not be embarking on one of the most innovative, health, creative, economic development projects in the United States, the Sankofa Wellness Village in Garfield Park. But that's how the story ends. When I took that leap, I didn't know where it would go. So I got recruited to Rush to be the inaugural chief medical officer, responsible for quality and safety at the hospital. And with a whole team of people, we went to the top of the world of quality and safety. Rush is a U.S. News and World Report Honor Roll hospital, one of the 20 on that list, and other measures of quality. We're in the top 5. We're ranked by Newsweek as one of the best hospitals in the world. And I remember that day standing on the podium, surrounded by my colleagues from all around the country, when the first time we got that ranking of number 1, and I got handed the plaque. It was plastic. But we had made it to the top. But something was nagging at me, because in the 30 years before I got to Rush, I worked on the west side of Chicago in safety net settings, and I'm also a social epidemiologist. And I saw the way that disease wrapped and wrecked the bodies of my patients, and how my treatment seemed insufficient. And there was something about the neighborhoods where they lived that dictated when they died. And it was something I never learned in medical school. And I wrote a book about this called The Death Gap, How Inequality Kills. And in this book, I laid out how social pathologies, things like structural racism, things like economic deprivation and poverty, were causes of poor health and premature mortality. And when we think about social pathologies like racism, like economic deprivation, we have to think about, and I wrote about this in the book, was that we have to treat inequality itself as if it's a virus and eradicate it like we would any epidemic. When I got to the last chapter of the book, I didn't know what to write. I didn't have a plan. And a friend of mine says, you get 1 point in the world for pointing out the problem, and 100 points for solving it. So I've written the book, and I had 1 point. And so reducing health inequities was a side hustle for me from being the chief medical officer. But then something happened. My best friend was a social epidemiologist who worked full-time on eliminating health disparities, a guy named Steve Whitman. Brilliant person, anti-racist. But he was one of the first people in the country to point out these neighborhood death gaps but he got sick, and I was his doctor through the end of his life. And it was one of the most devastating events, painful things that ever happened to me. But when he died, I decided that I had to pick up where he left off. Now, in the world of chief medical officers, nobody quits. They all die with their shoes on. But why would you leave being chief medical officer of an academic medical system when you've reached the pinnacle? But I decided to quit. But I didn't know how. That was that leap of faith, right? But I didn't know where it would go until I met Pastor Hatch. So we assembled some hospital and some community leaders to really ask the question, how can we begin to solve this problem of life expectancy gaps? It was January 2017, Malcolm X Junior College. We're sitting there with this room, and I'm sitting at a back table, and at that back table is Mrs. Angela Taylor, who Hawk knows very well, and Pastor Hatch. And this flashes up on the screen. This is what we presented to our board at Rush. And this flashed up the screen, and basically is the map of life expectancy on the west side of Chicago. You can live in the Loop. You can live to be 85 years old. And if the Loop were a country, it'd be ranked first in the world in life expectancy. Think Monaco or Spain. But go to the west side, to Garfield Park, and life expectancy plummets to 69. Now this was before COVID, it's now 66, it's even worse. Pastor Hatch, in his booming voice, seeing this, proclaims, the Bible says, the last shall be first. Now after that meeting, we organized something called Westside United, partnered the hospitals with community members. You heard Dr. Goodman speaking about that before. But Pastor Hatch's words were ringing in my head, and I called Pastor up, and he came to my office here at Rush, and we hatched a plan. And I didn't know, where do you start? So I said, Pastor, what if we start with a walk in Garfield Park in the summer? I swear I met Hawk. A walk in Garfield Park. And so our medical students organized a West Side Walk for Wellness. But more than that, we can set a table, we can sit around the table and listening to the aspirations of the community. Community wanted, we want grocers, we want jobs, no one wanted health care. We want support for our businesses. We want a wellness center. We want a place to exercise. Marquis Pitts, an employee at Rush, and a member of New Mount Pilgrim Church, said, we want a basketball court so people can play ball inside and be safe. And out of that table grew this idea of not just a wellness center, but a wellness village, arts, entrepreneurial development, groceries, and everything else. And this was the most optimistic table I sat at during the whole pandemic. So this was going on while the pandemic was going on. Pastor Hatch lost a lot of congregants to COVID. He lost an older sister. He lost his best friend. But never did he lose the optimism and vision. See, they had a vision. And Pastor Hatch had this vision for a village at the heart of the city. And if you go to his church, there's a stained glass window called the Sankofa window. And you can see it there. In the center is a shepherd, by the way, designed by congregants and the kids in the church. A shepherd leading children into a beautiful, bright future. And then around the centerpiece are the images of black children who've been murdered. The top four, the four black girls who were murdered by the Klan in Birmingham in 1963 at the 16th Street Baptist Church. But then there's that image at the very top of the Sankofa bird. Comes from Ghana. Feet are facing forward, head is looking backwards, because the idea of Sankofa is you can't move ahead without going back and retrieving the things you've lost or left behind. Now, West Garfield Park was the neighborhood one of the neighborhoods, when Martin Luther King did his northern campaign, he came to the west side of Chicago around jobs, around housing. And when he was assassinated, the neighborhood went up in flames, and those embers are still hot. And there's not been capital reinvestment in the community. Last year we heard there was something called the Chicago Prize. $10 million for the best project in a community in Chicago. We were underdogs, we're hardly organized, there's a bunch of us around the table. He said, let's apply for it. And so we applied for the Chicago Prize. 37 communities in Chicago applied for the Chicago Prize. There's no way we're going to make it. We got Hawk on our team and me. There's no way we're going to do this. We ended up in the finals. Well, we said that we get to the finals, we can get to the championship. We got to the finals, 6 finalists, 1 West Side project, 5 South Side projects, and they were formidable projects. They were amazing projects. No way to go. When they had movies, they had all this stuff going on. We did a presentation, not me, but our people, in front of people. It was more like theater. They had movies. We were doing a play. But in January, we got the news. We won the Chicago Prize. You know, I took a leap of faith at a time in my life when I was like really devastated. I gave up a job that was a sure thing and jumped into the unknown where I couldn't write the last chapter, right? And by taking that leap of faith, joined a community who had aspirations and hope for themselves. And we just tagged Rush and other organizations to their hopes and aspirations for what this community could be. And despite the devastation of COVID, you know, this community never gave up this hope for renewal. And that was amazing. And I'm not talking about blind faith. And I'm not talking about a hope that is kind of overly